Hey everyone, today we're going to be beginning a quick lecture. We're going to talk about a religion that emerged out of Hinduism, and it's going to be our second world religion that we discuss within the context of Eastern religions. And so today we're going to be talking about Jainism. So again, it's going to be a very short lecture, not just because there's not a lot of context within this, there's a lot of history and tradition. But primarily it's because it's a very simple religion to understand and give summary to. And so we're going to dive right into what is Jainism. So as always, let's begin with some basic facts about the religion itself. Jainism is a religious and philosophical tradition that arose in ancient India and is still practiced today. It arose contemporaneously with Buddhism and emerged out of the classical Vedic religions and early forms of classical Hinduism. And because of this characteristic, scholars typically lump Jainism or categorize Jainism within the subcategory of a Dharmaic religion, meaning that its roots are found in India. Its roots are found in the traditions and histories of Hinduism. And much of its religious vocabulary, its religious ideology, are based on a pre-existing knowledge of Hinduism. And Jainism as a religion has the same soteriological, that's just a fancy term for concerns with salvation. So Jainism as a religion has the same soteriological goals as Hinduism and Buddhism, meaning the goal of life is to escape samsara and to achieve moksha. So that's why scholars have classified it as a Dharmaic religion. Jainism can also be classified as a counter religion to that of the old Vedic religion system of Hinduism. And what do I mean by that? Is that Jainism emerged as an alternative to a kind of dissatisfaction that emerged within Indian society as late as the 7th to 6th century BCE. The old Vedic religion at this time was very much centered on sacrifices to the gods, performing rituals, very highly ritualized society that gave preeminence to the priestly caste or the Brahmins within Hindu culture. Jainism, like Buddhism, offered an alternative. It offered a source of empowerment towards the individual. Some historians of religion would put Jainism in this kind of classification of historical movements around the 6th century BCE that was happening throughout civilizations as this revolution, this turning point within religion. It's no coincidence that Jainism emerges at the same time in a different area of India. And mind you, India is a huge, huge country. It is so big that we classify it as a subcontinent. It's massive. And so while Buddhism was emerging in India in the very northeast portions of India, Jainism was emerging more towards the central western portions of India, if not southwest area of India. And so it was almost like a different continental divide at this time. But it's coincidental that Jainism emerges around the same time as Buddhism. It's also coincidental that Jainism emerges at the same time as other famous world religions are emerging onto the stage of history. Taoism, Confucianism are emerging around the same time that do have emphasis upon individuality. Changes and evolutions within the ancient religion of the Israelites. We see the emergence of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible emerging around the 6th century. We also see in Greek culture a change in natural philosophy towards classical philosophy. and a change in a critique in religions as well. So it's known as this Axle Age period, but primarily for here, Jainism can be classified as a counter religion to the old Vedic religion because a lot of it is set up in contradiction to or as an alternative to Hinduism. But primarily the old Vedic sacrificial priestly religions of the Brahmins. Jainism is a very small religion and constitutes what many religious scholars and sociologists would call a minority religion. And so very briefly, if I could provide you with a definition as to what a minority religion is, a minority religion is a religion held by a minority of the population of a country, a given state, or a specific region, and who are subjected to various stigmatisms, if not outright discrimination. So Jainism, as a minority religion, really wasn't segmented to too much persecution. We'll see that when we come to Judaism, that Judaism had significant amount of persecution. Sikhism, our next religion that we'll talk about, is a minority religion in India and has a vast amount of history as a persecuted religion. Zoroastrianism, as well as we'll talk about, a minority religion and subjected to a lot of persecution. That seems to be part and parcel to being a minority religion. Hence, we see that in historical cultures as well. Minorities within given societies tend to receive discrimination. Jainism is a little bit different in that it didn't really receive the minority treatment because of its close parallelisms and significant similarities with that of Hinduism. And so it was kind of brought under the umbrella for Hinduism for a very long time, which helped to create a protective status towards Jainism, but it did receive some persecution, but it was very small. Anyhow, Jains, as the followers of Jainism is known, are very small. Their global religious population is somewhere around 5 to 6 billion followers, so very small. If we would put that on a scale of percentages, that would be around 0.07% of the world's population. So yeah, that's very small. Also, minority religions tend to evolve as a religion due to external social forces. Those are, those are changes that occur within a society, as opposed to internal changes and debates within the community, which tends to occur within majority religions. So, for example, when we get to our next lecture of religions talking about Sikhism, you'll see how Sikhism was forced to evolve and change because of external social forces, aka persecution. Judaism does the same thing. It evolves and morphs and develops as a religion because of external social forces. But when we get to Christianity, you'll see that Christianity develops because of internal social forces. And those changes occur from religious debates, political debates within an established majority religion. And so the evolutions that it has there look and feel much different. Jainism, however, is the exception to the rule, that even though it is a minority religion, much of the change that we see within Jainism occurred from internal struggles. So this is why it is an exception to the rule. A lot of the changes that it had in the religion mirrored that of Buddhism. So again, it's very important. Jainism and their religion is primarily and exclusively found within India. Like I said, close to around 5 million of India's population self-identify as Jain and are largely confined to the western portions of the country of India. So you can see on this map, this is India as it is today, and you can see that the dark blue areas are where the majority of Sikhs, or not Sikhs, Jains live in India. The very lighter shades to almost whiter shades of India, you can see that it's very small percentages here. Until, also you have to consider that India is a country of 1.2 billion citizens, and Jains only make up about 5 million of its population, so a very small fragment of Indian society self-identifies as Jain. However, the influences of Jainism has been a far greater effect on Indian populations than these numbers suggest. Jains have contributed to significantly the history of Indian culture, as well as Indian art, literature, architecture, and Jains routinely are the highest educated population within Indian society. But Jains do have a small diaspora of people who live across the entire globe, and so that's why Jainism can be loosely categorized as a world religion. That again, 5 million Jains live in India, close to 1 million Jains live across the globe. And so you will find Jains in very isolated areas of the United States and in Canada, but they do have a small but significant population in the United Kingdom, Australia, Nepal, Burma, Malaysia. But Jains do have a surprising significant amount of followers in various African countries like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and then surprisingly, outside of India, the largest denominations of Jains live in Japan. That the largest of their diaspora live in Japan. So it's very interesting that they do have a semi-global reach and followers, and so that's why they get included as a world religion. Also here, Jainism can be loosely classified as an ethno-religion. So we're going to use this term a lot in this course, and if you recall what an ethno-religion is, it means that it's a religion that is self-identified or exclusively tied to one's ethnicity. So Jains are predominantly of an Indian descent. Rarely will you meet a Jain who is not from India or ethnically identified with India. But that has changed in the modern period, that you now starting to see African Jains because of their diaspora in Africa. You're starting to see a lot of white Americans, Europeans converting to this religion on a small scale. So that's why it says now it's loosely defined as an ethno-religion, but it was for a very long time exclusively an ethno-religion. Jainism is also a non-missionary religion. It's a non-proselytizing religion. It does not actively seek out converts, but it does have a conversion ritual that's typically given to children of a certain age, but they have incorporated it to individuals who now join their religion. So primarily how Jainism grows is through marriage, through childbirth. And so that's why Jainism is also classified as an ideogamy religion, meaning that it only grows through marriage. So that's significant to notify about, or to note about Jainism. So right off the bat, those are some basic facts about the religion of Jainism. So now let's go into the origins of Jainism. The origins of Jainism, like Hinduism, are very obscure, but may have a point of origin to it. According to Jain traditions, the religion is eternal. It has a very, very, very long history of existence, and has a series of great teachers that they also consider founders of their faith. Within the Janus traditions, they believe that their religion, as well as the earth, is around 21,000 years old. Now, we know scientifically the earth is much older than that, and therefore it's impossible that their religion is 21,000 years old. But again, this fits within Jan timelines and with Jan teachings and doctrines. But in reality, scholars believe that the roots of the religion really lie within the 8th to the 5th century BCE, and is somewhat contemporaneous with the beginnings of Buddhism, as well as the emergence of the Upanishads and the religious movement that spurred within Hinduism. So again, Janus traditions say that its origins are eternal, and that they date the creation of the earth as well as its religion to 21,000 years ago. However, scholars typically believe that the religion should be dated to its origins to around somewhere in the 8th century to 5th century BCE, with that coincides with the urbanization of India. Jains revere and look back within their history to a series of great teachers, 24 great teachers in exact numbers. These teachers are known as the Tirthankaras, the Tirthankaras, or in English it means bridge builders. Because within Janus theology, these individuals were considered and revered because they were successful in crossing over from their captivity of samsara into achieving moksha, which in the Jan dialect they would call moksha. So it's similar words, but it's instead of moksha, it's moksha. So it's Mokkha. But for our purposes, I'm going to be consistent and use moksha. The first of these Tirthankaras was an individual named Rishabhanathara, who is also known as Adishvara, or the first Jan. Sometimes you'll also see the first Jina, which spelled G-N or G-I-N-A. Again, it's from their dialect within India. Kind of a side note here, even though India is a very large, very, very, very large nation, India has, and typically the Indian population speaks predominantly Hindi, the modern dialect of India today. There's also various sub-dialects within the region and within the country itself. So there's over, last educated count that I remember doing was around 19 to 20 different dialects within their country, but it's actually much, much bigger. That number is. So I feel like I'm giving a very low ballpark figured number there. But anyhow, so within Jan dialect, so again, sometimes you'll see in writing, Jan's referred to as J-I-N-A, but for our purposes, we're going to use the more common spelling, J-A-I-N for Jan. So anyhow, back to Rishabhanathara. So he was the first Jan. And so the word Jan within their dialect means conqueror. And it's not to refer to some kind of physical conqueror in a sense, but rather a spiritual conqueror, one who's able to conquer, break free from samsara. And so they see, within Jainism, they see spirituality in very militaristic terms, in a sense that they'll use to battle, to combat, to conquer, to destroy. They will use those language to defeat. They would use that type of language But note, this is nothing within a physical context. In fact, Jains are very peaceful, very nonviolent people, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But instead, I just want to emphasize that they're talking about spirituality things here. And so for a Jain, it refers to both an accomplishment as well as an attitude one needs. You need to conquer samsara. You need to defeat, you need to break free from the painful, endless cycle of samsara. So, according to Jain traditions, Rishabh Hanatha was a prince. And kind of a side note here, a lot of the origin stories with Jain teachers and followers will sound very similar to what you will hear about Siddhartha Gautama. So the origin stories of not only Rishabh Hanatha, as well as Maharava, that we'll talk about here in a minute, their origin stories are going to sound identical to that of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. So it's led some scholars to even doubt the historicity of these stories. Or if the idea of Buddhism was copying from Jainism, or was Jainism copying from Buddhism, we really don't know. But I just want to make this statement here because you're going to hear me retell this story twice. Once more later in this lecture for Jainism, and then you're going to hear me tell it again when we get to the Buddha. So real quick, Rishabh Hanatha was a prince who enjoyed very worldly pleasures and royalty and knew no sorrow in his life and existence. He had a life of pleasure. He was a prince of a great kingdom that was going to become a great king once his father died. He had a marriage, he had a child, and everything was going well and fantastic. However, the story goes that one day Rishabh Hanatha encountered someone who was dying of sickness. And this was the first time that the prince became aware of the transitory nature of human existence, that we can become sick, that we can become old, that we can die. He had never been surrounded by those things. He hadn't seen any of these things before. And so it frightened him. It frightened him nearly, well, not to death, but it frightened him so much that it spawned him to action. He wanted to understand how could he defeat death? How could he conquer death, conquer illness, conquer old age? So, in response to seeing these signs, he renounced his wealth, he renounced his position as prince, and became an ascetic monk. According to Jainist traditions, he spent 1,000 years searching and meditating and living an ascetic life. But finally, during his meditations and during his search and living the ascetic life, Rishabh Hanatha finally achieved in Jainism enlightenment, what is sometimes referred to as Kevala Jnana, or just sometimes Kevala, enlightenment. And so according to Jain traditions, after he had a religious awakening and found the answer, it is said that he in turn set up a preaching hall within the Jainist tradition. It is known as Samavasarana. Samavasarana, which is again translated as a preaching hall, that he created in this transitory place between heaven, or between, I guess not really heaven, but between moksha, escaping samsara and escaping this life, and earth, where he would teach other future Tirthankaras his message. And that this is what was to be heard from his preaching halls, and that all living things would have to succumb to this law of nature, this universal truth, And he eventually created what is known in Jainism as the five vows of ethics. And so this is at the heart of Janist traditions. Jain traditions are very much considered on how to escape life. And so the virtues that are described here are the ways that someone will be able to break free from samsara. And so this tradition is to be observed by all Jains and all Jain monks. Now, I'm kind of going to jump ahead real quick, but Jain society is broken into really two castes. There's the ascetics, the ascetic monks, and there is what in Jainism calls the householder, or we would term, a more proper term would be the laity, the non-religious individuals. So these wouldn't be your priests, these wouldn't be monks, these would just be the average people who go and go to church, who go to temple, who pray, common people like me and you. This same hierarchy, the same dichotomy of Jainist society we'll see within Buddhism. Buddhism society is broken down into those two categories as well, the monks and the laity. And so within Jainism, everybody has to do this. The ascetic monks have more put on them, more traditions, more ethics, more vows that are to be taken upon them. But the basics of all Jains are to follow this. And this comes from their first and great bridge builder. So the first of these teachings is probably the most famous Jainist doctrine of them all. And that is the doctrine of ahimsa. Ahimsa is the most fundamental principle within Jainism. And it is to be understood and to be performed throughout your life and existence. And that basically means do no harm, or it sometimes gets translated as non-violence. But the literal translation actually is do no action. Do no action. And I like that literal translation better than the average translation of do no harm or do no violence, because you'll see why I like that translation later, because a translation later, or better, sorry, because later it's going to help us understand some more aspects of Jainist practices. And so harm or action within Jainism refers to any action committed against other living beings, from humans to animals to insects on the ground to yourself. All action, all activity within Jainism has a consequence. So this is something that is different from how Hinduism describes karma. That karma can be good, karma can be bad. Same thing within Buddhism. Karma will be described as more as having the right intentions, but also the right actions. But there are good intentions, good actions, and there are bad intentions, bad actions. So for Jainism, this is a little bit different. For Jainism, there's all actions have one consequence. They have a consequence. And they see this consequence neither good nor bad. And in those dichotomy terms, they're very neutral in that they have a consequence. And that consequence is karma. Therefore, ahimsa involves having the individual needs to have the right walk. Way of living is the better translation, but walk is also the more literal interpretation too. The right kind of speech, the right kind of eating. Jains are vegans. They avoid eating any meat, But they also avoid, they are very specific vegans as well. They avoid eating any vegetables that have roots, because in order to pull it up, you are disturbing the soil. You have to rip, a potato out of the ground, and thus could potentially harm life, worms. So thus Jains don't eat any vegetables that have roots or that grow as a root. They only eat fruits and vegetables that come from trees or come from vines. So eating the right things, the right handling of things as well, and even the right way to evacuate your bodily fluids. There's a right way to pee. There's a right way to poop within Jainism. That's how significant they view ahimsa. It's a life-encompassing view. Everything you do has consequence. So ahimsa is all about having the right kind of consciousness, the right kind of awareness. Because, and the reason why you do this is because it can affect your reincarnation. There is a realization that a Jain cannot live completely without doing harm. So again, there's no such thing as good karma, bad karma. They all have a consequence. So a Jain knows that, I need to eat, that I need to walk from A to B. And in the chance of my walking, I could potentially kill and step on an ant. Thus, every action that I do has a consequence. Therefore, for Jains, they strive their utmost ability to minimize the harm. That's a better word here. They do everything in their life to minimize action. And so what do I mean by that? There are some Jains who take action to the furthest extreme. Eating is an action. You need food to sustain your body. But with Jainism, the body, we'll talk about here in a little bit, the body is what keeps you trapped, keeps your soul trapped to this earth. And so you eat food in order to prolong your existence, to prolong your body. Your body needs food to function. So there are some Jains who will get to the point in their life where they will abstain from food. They will go on a permanent fast, and they will not eat until they die. Until they die of starvation. Because the act of eating is an action. So again, that's why I don't like the term do no harm, do no violence for ahimsa. I think the better translation is action, because there are some extreme elements of what we would consider extreme elements of Jainism who take it to the fundamental end of its philosophical, theological, ideological conclusion of do no harm, do no action. And so there will be Jains that will sit still, will not move, and so their body will atrophy. Their legs, they'll lose the ability to walk because they will not move. They won't move their arms, and so the muscles from their bodies will decrease, and they'll lose. They'll develop atrophy and won't be able to function and move. There are even some Jains that will go without water as well and die of thirst, all for the reason of achieving moksha. And so I'll break those down in a little bit, but I wanted to stress here what ahimsa is. Typically, we think of ahimsa as being nonviolence, and that is how it's typically interpreted. But however, there are some elements of do no action. So I want to stress that point. However, I also want to say the majority of Jains do not do those practices. They take do no harm as quite literally, do no harm. Do nothing that will cause any kind of harm to an individual or to yourself. And so Jains are very loving people, very kind people, compassionate people. And it's true that many of the civil rights leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and MLK studied the doctrine of ahimsa, do no harm, and applied it to their nonviolent protest. And so Gandhi was extremely influenced by Jain thoughts and Jain's teachings. And so later on, Hinduism absorbed much of the elements of Jainism, and this was one of the main elements that they absorbed. And so Hindus, by and large, practice nonviolence. Hindus, by and large, are vegetarians. Most of them are. However, there's a few, because of society, because of modernization, who aren't anymore. But again, they take these principles from ahimsa and from Jainism. The next thing that I want to talk about is satya, which is speak the truth. And this is a very simple ideology that we can understand, which means basically always tell the truth and be mindful that words can be hurtful. Words have consequences. So Jains see that the cause of falsehood and mean words being from passion and emotions. So part of speaking the truth is also denying emotions and suppressing one's passions, because those things only lead to harm and pain. Those things only lead to action. They also believe in astia, which basically means do not steal. Pretty self-explanatory, but it's more expansive to include not paying fully, to meaning that you pay the full price for something as well. So, for example, if you're bartering with somebody in Jainist cultures, you don't barter for something. You don't try to talk down the price of something in order to get it cheaper. That is considered stealing within their ethics and cultures. Whatever the sticker price is, that's what you pay, because it's about being honest. It's about being truthful. It's about being respectful to others. The other is bara makahara, which basically means chastity. Now, this is more expansive and is dependent upon one's position as a monk or a householder. For monks, this is complete chastity, having no sex whatsoever, having no intercourse whatsoever, not even masturbating, not even to be sexually aroused by something. For men, not even to have an erection. That is a violation. That is a no-no. That, again, goes all the way back to ahimsa, having actions, not being truthful, having passions and emotions. And so that's for monks, who are for ascetics, that is chastity in its complete form. Again, no intercourse, not even masturbation, not even arousal, both men and women. But for the householder, for the laity, this really is refined to sexual faithfulness and abstinence as well. So if you are married, you're only to have intercourse with your spouse. If you're not married, you're to avoid sex at all costs until you are married, and then you have intercourse with your wife, and that is it. The last of these 5 great vows that a Jain is to prescribe and to subscribe is that of, that of aparigatara, which is no attachments, no possessions. Worldly wealth within Jainism, the accumulation of wealth is considered as a potential source of rising greed, of jealousy, of selfishness, of desires. It's giving in to your emotions and giving up emotional attachments, giving up sensual pleasures and material possessions as a means to help you liberate yourself from this life and within Jain philosophy. And we'll talk more about that and why. All consumption is more appropriate if it is essential to only one's survival. And so for the Jain laity, yeah, eating food is okay. Having possessions, doing work in order to get food, and to have, doing work in order to have a house, have electricity, having a car to go to your job is okay. But that's it. Is to be a minimalist, if possible, for the laity. So no hoarding of items. That's considered very important, inappropriate, as well as ego. Having ego is also considered attachments. And so, showing off is also included as aspects of that. The next significant thinker of the religion that I want to talk about is the last of these Tirthankara that Jains revere the most. And it's the 24th of the Tirthankara, and that is Mahavira. Mahavira, who's also considered both by Jains and in general religious scholars as the founder of the modern religion of Jainism as we have it today. Thus, Jains can be loosely categorized as a founder religion, but with an asterisk beside it, because, again, it believes in these 24 Tirthakaras. Most of these are mythical in belief. They did not have existence. Maybe, possibly the 23rd might have been a historical figure. The 24th possibly as well, and it's more believed to be an historical figure as well. So this is why Jainism can be classified as a founder religion, but like I said, with a giant asterisk beside it, because again, Jainist traditions don't say that, but other times they do. So it is kind of confusing. Jain traditions, so again, well, I guess I should mention that as this founder religion, well, we know about more founder religions, so I don't need to break that down. Well, I guess I should, because we haven't really talked about yet. We're about to meet one next lecture within Sikhism, so I think it's a good space here to define what is a founder religion, because we haven't talked about one yet. So a founder religion refers to a historical figure who, through their life and deeds, established a religion or a religious community or a religious philosophy that were to be founded. Founder religions are very unique and operate in a certain way because the religion itself is primarily seen and understood through the life and teachings of the founder. So Christianity, for example. Christianity, the founder of Christianity is Jesus Christ. So to understand Christianity, you need to understand the life of Jesus. Islam, the founder of Islam, is the Prophet Muhammad. To understand Islam, you need to understand who was the prophet, the historical prophet of Muhammad. So that's what a founder religion is. This one can loosely be categorized as a founder religion, but we're going to treat it as a founder religion, hence going forth. Now back to Mahavira. So traditions hold that Mahavira lived during the 6th century BCE and was born into royalty in India as a prince. Here's our second story. So the story goes that around the age of 29, 30, that Mahavira lived a life of prosperity, of pleasure, of sensational pleasures, knew no social ill, knew no physical ill, knew nothing of death, knew nothing of illness, knew nothing of sickness, knew nothing of old age, but at the age of 30 largely becomes dissatisfied with living a royal life and having worldly pleasures. So the prince wanted to go and visit the real world and see what the real world was like for his 30th birthday. And that's where he encountered the real world, encountered poverty, encountered starvation, encountered sickness, encountered old age, encountered death, and had all these questions and was, again, fearful, but had a desire that he wanted to conquer these things. So the story goes, surprise, surprise, he comes back, renounces his royalty, and becomes an ascetic monk, searching for the answer to how to escape this endless cycle. Mahavira undertook severe fasting, bodily mortification, and what that means is punishing your body, either physically beating it or putting your body in physical positions in order to cause yourself pain. And also, Mahavira did away with clothing, that he was buck naked, and started meditating straight for days and days and days on end. And according to Jainist traditions, after 13 years of living this type of ascetic lifestyle, Mahavira finally was able to achieve enlightenment and went around teaching his new philosophy for 30 years before his death. His disciples are said to have collected his teachings and books into his teachings into a book. However, Jain traditions state that his writings were lost and were not written down again until the 1st century CE, and we'll talk about that book. However, scholars are not sure if Mahavira actually was even a real person, as much of his story, again, parallels that with Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and who we'll talk about later on. So we're not sure. That's why there's an asterisk beside this. But however, similar to the first Tirthankara that we talked about, Mahavira taught 5 vows, 5 ethics. And he also developed one of the most central doctrines outside of the 5 vows of Ahimsa and all of those. He also created some of the essential doctrines within the tradition, religious tradition. Those being the concept of jiva and ajiva, soul and matter. So Mahavira taught that the soul, jiva, exists, that every human being has a soul. Every living being has a soul. Animals have a soul, down to the dung beetle has a soul. The mosquito that bites our arm has a soul. Everything has a soul. A premise that was shared with Hinduism, but not with Buddhism. So I want to make that clear. Buddhism doesn't believe in a soul, and we'll talk more about that. Mahavira regards the soul as one of the 6 internal substance of the earth, or sometimes known as dravas, which help create the universe. But yet, according to Mahavira, the soul, this eternal soul, is bound by samsara, meaning it's trapped in human form, in this earthly flesh. Ajiva, trapped in matter. And it's kept trapped in there by karma. So again, karma affecting us, but within Jainism, and as Mahavira taught it, both good and bad. There is no such thing as good karma. There's no such thing as bad karma. Karma is karma. It's what keeps you trapped. According to Mahavira, he describes karma as coloring your soul. I think the term he uses is Lisa, Lesya, Lisa, and affects how, what, and where the soul is reborn. And so the soul, jiva here, becomes trapped by the anti-soul, matter, ajiva, and is encased or weighed down by matter that is accrued by karma. So if you think about it, doing any kind of action entraps your soul. So what do we do as humans? Just let's put this in the modern context of today. Well, humans, we have to work in order to buy food, in order to have a house, in order to buy clothes, to clothe ourselves, to keep us warm, to keep us cool. We have to travel from home to work. We have to earn money. We have to pay bills. We have to take out loans to have bigger houses and bigger cars. All of this within Mahavira's philosophy is actions. Good or bad, doesn't matter. It's actions. And it's these actions that keep and sustain ajiva, the body. And it's what keeps our soul entrapped. And that is the purpose of the 5 vows, is to find a way to help your soul break free from the matter that is there. Mahavira also taught that there is no creator, helper, deity. But later Jains acknowledged lesser deities and demons, but they're all subject to the same fate as humans, and that of samsara. Jainism is often described as a transtheistic religion, meaning a religious philosophy and system of thought that is neither theistic, having a god, or atheistic, believing that there is no God. In truth, Jainism is beyond all of that. You could classify, to simplify, say Jainism is a non-theistic religion, doesn't believe in a God, but it doesn't need to have that belief. Its cosmology is very simple. There's only soul and matter. There's only jiva and ajiva. That's all that exists. That is it. So it doesn't need to have a God. It doesn't need to have a pantheon of deities. It doesn't need to have all of these things. It's beyond all of that. So that's why we say it's transtheistic. It transcends theistic religions. But again, to simplify it, I'm okay if you say it's non-theistic. It's atheistic religion. It doesn't believe there is a God. Because it doesn't. Even though some lesser Jains do teach and believe in lesser deities and demons, subnatural creatures and stuff like that, because of ancient Indian cultures and folk traditions that get absorbed into their cultures. But again, like I say, it's a non-theistic religion. Jains see the universe as eternal. It has no beginning. It has no end. So therefore, there's no need for a creator deity. It just simply exists in their universe. The goal of this, I also forgot to talk about real quick. In addition to jiva and ajiva, Mahavira taught also the doctrine of anikata tavadara, or the doctrine of the many-side reality. So what does that mean? That's a really big word. What the heck does that mean? Mahavira taught that truth and reality are complex things, and that they have, like truth, has a number of aspects with it. But reality can be experienced, yet it can never fully be expressed. So the example that Mahavira uses about this, about truth and about reality of why the world exists the way it does, is because it's complex, it's multi-faced, multi-value. And so the example that Mahavira uses is that concerning taste. So he says that humans can participate, can communicate a partial expression of truth about taste through language. That's how we do it. So, for example, a Pop-Tart. We could say, oh, this Pop-Tart tastes like strawberries. It's not strawberries. What's the idea of strawberries? Is that a universal truth that it's an expression, rather. It's an expression only in part of something else. It's not the full truth, but it's a comparison in a sense. So again, the Pop-Tart tastes like strawberries. However, language itself is not the truth, but a means of expressing that truth, like strawberries. So therefore, Mahavira talks about that one can only experience the full truth of taste by physically tasting, but cannot fully express that taste through language. So meaning that you can only experience truth. You can't describe truth. And so this is the reason why Mahavira does not believe in gods, because he talks about salvation, in a sense, lies in your hands. And this is the counter-revolutionary aspect of Jainism. There is no gods because gods can't help you. The only person that can help you is yourself. Because like taste, the only way you know what that Pop-Tart tastes like is by actually tasting it. The only way you can save yourself is actually saving yourself. So I'm hoping you can get that idea down. It's a big term, but basically it's used to explain the reality of it, the universe. The best example that I could use to summarize this is Descartes, the famous French 16th century philosopher, no, 17th century philosopher Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am." That the reason he knows who he is, the reason we as humans know we exist, is because of our personal experiences, not somebody else's. Somebody else can't tell you you're real. Only you can tell you're real. And so that 17th century French philosophy is the philosophy of Mahavira here, and the philosophy of Jainism, and why this is how Jainism works as a religion, why it doesn't believe in gods. And thus it puts all of its eggs in one basket, that basket being you. You physically have to make the effort. So finally, because of that, the goal of Jainism then is liberation. The liberation of the soul, jiva, from the karmic accumulations of ajiva, and thus being able to end the cycle. Only you can do it. No God can do it for you. Jains don't believe in bhakti traditions of Hinduism. Only you have the power to do it. And so it's through things like ahimsa that you're able to finally break free from samsara and become within Jainism a siddha, or an enlightened person. And that your soul now is able to be purified. That's really the goal of why you're doing this, is to purify your soul in order for it to break free from samsara upon your death. And that's the only way you can achieve enlightenment, is by your death, your soul is finally breaking free from matter. And so this is the heart of the religion. So I'm hoping that makes sense. Let me try it, because I'm worried that this might be complicated. So again, let me simplify it maybe some more here. Again, Jains believe that you have a soul. Your soul is an eternal being that gets trapped through the process of reincarnation. Every time your physical form dies, your soul is trapped in a body. And we'll talk about more once we get to this, but you moved along the progression of incarnation, and the human being is the highest form of reincarnation within Jainism. So you're at your highest peak now. And so your goal is to liberate your soul. And only as a human can you do that. And so you have to purify your soul. You purify your soul by not committing actions, ahimsa. You purify your body, your soul. Let me rephrase that: not your body, your soul, through speaking the truth, satya. You make sure that you don't steal anything. You're always truthful with everybody, asteya. You practice chastity with your physical form, not giving yourself into sensual desires. Brahmacharya. I'm saying that wrong. Brahmacharya. Chastity. And that you're able to purify yourself even more by not having attachments, not having possessions. Apagarira. And so that is the goal of Jainism as a religion. So now let's talk about the denominations. Well, before we do that, actually, let's let's go in the order. I didn't realize that my slides were out of order here, so let me go transition to, let's talk about Jain scriptures, symbols, and worship. The Jain tradition believes that their religion, again, is eternal, and that the teachings of the first Thankara exist 1 million years ago. They believe that the teachings of the Tirthankara were transmitted in mythical preaching halls, in which ascetics and these Tirthankara heard and orally preserved the teachings. These divine discourses within Jainism are known as Shrut Jnana, which means the heard knowledge. According to Jain traditions, the divine Shrut Jnana of a Tirthankara is converted into scriptures later on in time, suttas, by his disciples. And from such suttas emerge a kind of formal canon that we have in scriptures. According to Jain traditions, the original unadulterated teachings of the Tirthankara are what are known as the purvas, or it means in their dialect prior texts. But both denominations of Jainism that we'll talk about here in a minute agree to these scriptures. But they agree that these scriptures are completely lost. The original unadulterated teachings of the Tirthankaras are gone and are lost and have even disappeared from earth. So instead, around the year 453, some will say even 466 CE, that the Jains held a famous council at Vallabhikha in India, and that they compiled the various oral traditions and recorded them as a written manuscript under the leadership of Anakara Shamara Devaraganya, along with 500 other Jain scholars. And it's those traditions that now become a book that is read, known as the Agamas. And those are the canonical scriptures of the Jainist people, particularly of one of the major denominations of Jainism that we'll talk about next, the Tambara, the Sitambara. The Agamas contain several dialogues, mainly between Mahravara and his disciples, and also that were transmitted to another follower named Idrahutbi, and that those were translated into a chain of transmissions between disciple, disciple, disciple. So it's a bunch of, it reads very similarly to the Talmud of Jewish scriptures, that it is a transmission of teachings from various histories. But again, the other significant denomination of Jainism, known as the Digambaras, don't recognize this as the canonical scriptures, but this is the canonical scriptures of the Janist people. Jains do have temples to their worships known as Derazra, and they play a huge role in the religious life of a Jain. The temple primarily houses the image of a Tithakara or several Tithakaras known as a Murti. We've already just seen that word when talking about the Hindu gods. That word applies to theirs as well. And it's sometimes a place that is a fixed position, or is sometimes it can be a movable festival as well. The Murti can be placed in other places, but typically it's housed inside the Jain temple. Jain statues, Murtis, all look very similar, if not alike, to one another. Either an image of a male being seated in a lotus position, but occasionally, sometimes the male is standing. He's always shirtless, if not naked, and with elongated earlobes. And so within Jainist traditions, very long earlobes indicated the level of wisdom and intelligence. And they even look very similar to Indian sculptures of the Buddha. So there sometimes can be confusions if this is a Jain Murti of a Tithakara, or if this was a Buddhist Murti of the Buddha. But they do have some significant distributions. Mainly the one that I've always seen of Jain Tithakaras, they're always buck naked, so that's easy to tell. Many of the earliest of these temples that Jains used were actually made from natural edification. So typically they were cut out of the rocks of a side of a hill and converted into a shrine. But over time, they started to construct temples, isolated edifice structures of temples that have very similar styles to that of Hinduism as well. So it can be difficult to tell the two apart if you go to modern day India. But until you get to the statue of the Murti, then you can clearly tell, because like I said, typically Jain Murti statues, it's always a male and he's always buck naked. So if you see a penis, chances are it's a Jain Murti. In recent times, the use of Murti images have become controversial within Jainist traditions. Some smaller sects of Jainism reject them entirely, believing that they shouldn't exist. And because, again, the veneration of these Tithakaras can be seen as worshiping a god. But however, most do allow it. Some Jains will even pray and worship. Worship is known as jinas, Jinas, which are, let me rephrase that. They worship they worship other beings. Let me rephrase that. Jinas are other beings. Basically, they're saints within the Jainist system. So they're not Tithakaras, but they're people who have achieved enlightenment. There are historical figures. They're individuals who have ceased karma and have been able to achieve moksha, but who have enough merit that can be passed down to fellow Jains like saints. And so Jains will pray to these individuals as well. So other Jains have a huge problem with this, but this is something that has emerged out of Jainism, that you also see within Bhakti traditions of Hinduism, as well as in Sufi Islam. And so it's we're not sure if uh, who who created it when. If the Jains got this from Muslims, and particularly Sufi Muslims who believe in saints as well, or from Christians, Catholic Christians later on as well, we're not sure. The most basic ritual of Jainism is that of the Darasana, or which is the seeing of a Tithakara, but it can also apply to seeing of a Jain saint as well. Typically, the Jain layperson enters into the Jain temple, the inner sanctuary of the temple, and they're clothed. They typically are clothed in very simple clothing, bare feet. Usually, the clothing is white clothing, shoeless, with a plate filled with offerings, and bows down and says Namaste. Greets the statue, begins to pray a ritualized prayer. Sometimes it's being assisted by a Jainist priest as well, and leaves the offering and depart. Most of the times, Jains use mantras to assist them in their prayers, and so it's believed that during the prayer and during the recitation of the mantra, that their mind, and through meditation, that they're able to connect with the Tithakara, and the Tithakara can teach them things about how to escape samsara. And sometimes Jains will also give a particular offering of rice. That's the most common food that is used, and they typically draw this thing out, the rice, as a swastika. And so that's probably, you can already see that on the slide. Why is this Nazi symbol doing on a lecture about Jainism? Well, the Nazis stole it from Indian cultures, and we're going to talk about that here. So again, when we think about swastika, we think about Adolf Hitler, we think about the Nazis, we think about anti-Semitism, we think about Aryan Superman, we think about Aryanism. However, the swastika within Indian culture, but more specifically within Jainism, is a very sacred and commonly used iconography. You go to India, you're going to see this symbol everywhere. And particularly you see it on the Jan Murti statue as well. Within Jainism, the swastika has meaning. It's a very common symbol to understand the process, a visual symbol to understand the process of reincarnation. So the swastika symbolizes the 4 places in which the soul could be reborn in the process of samsara. So the first is Sangra, which is heaven. The other is Mansua, which is humanity. The third is the Tiryanka, which is the flora and fauna. And the last is Narka, which is hell, before the soul can achieve moksha. So it's believed that it goes within this cycle, and that imagine the swastika as turning of a wheel. And so the soul falls into this. And so if things go well within your life, the wheel turns in the positive directions. But if things go badly, it can turn in the negative direction. So your soul can fall within the different slots at various times, but it has to progress forward and eventually move. And so that's why the swastika is a very important symbol within Jainism. And so it's one of their most common symbols that you will see. And so it's a visual symbol of where the soul fits into these slots. Finally, there's another common symbol within Jainism that we needed to discuss, and that is that of the open hand with a wheel inside of it. So you can see it here on the screen here, that it's an open palm hand with a wheel inside of it and some writing in the middle of it. This wheel is known as the Dharma Chakra. the wheel of the Dharma, and it is a very popular notion within all Dharmaic religions, whether this is Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and to some extent Sikhism, but it's a very common symbol. It appears on the flag of modern day India today, the Dharma Chakra. Within Jainism, as well as in Hinduism, the Dharma wheel symbolizes the cosmic law and the cycle of samsara, that it turns the wheel, it turns the motion. But however, for Jains, the wheel appears in an open hand, which is the universal symbol for stop. And so for Jainism, the goal is to stop the process, similarly to that of Buddhism. But Jainism takes greater ownership of this. And so it's the goal of the religion, if we can simplify it into a simple phrase, is to stop samsara. For Jains, this symbol teaches the overall goal of the religion. The word within the wheel that you see here that's very unique to Jainism is that of ahimsa, written in the dialect script of the Jains. And so how do Jains stop samsara? They stop it with ahimsa, no action. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is the various denominations of Jainism. And like Buddhism, the whole community of Jainism is described as a community, whether it's ascetic or laity, that constitutes the Sangha, the community. The Jain community is primarily divided into really three denominations of three major denominations of Jainism. But really, two of them get the most priority and the most visual aspects of Jain culture. But there's really three denominations here. On a side note, we haven't used this term before, but the term denomination, what does that mean? Within the field of religion, denomination refers to a subgroup within a larger religious tradition. Sometimes you might see sect being used, and a definition for sect here would be, and what I mean by sect is S-E-C-T, not S-E-X. I'm not talking about sex here, but a sect. A sect refers to a religious or political subgroup that is connected to a larger group, but that has benefits, or that has beliefs, not benefits, but beliefs that differ greatly from the main group, and that they usually emerge from the actions of a breakaway or a separating from the main group, or are forced to separate due to perceived heresies within the main group. So denomination is a better term here, but you will see elements of sect being used as well within their story. So an example of this would be within Christianity, that Christianity can be subdivided into Catholicism as a denomination, Protestantism as a denomination, Eastern Orthodox Christianity as a denomination. That's a denomination. Mormonism is a denomination. A sect would be, like within Mormonism, a sect would be that of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sometimes seen as RLSD, or just simply the Community of Christ. A subgroup within Protestantism would be that of Baptists, Methodists. A sect of Baptists would be the Anabaptists, or would be the Mennonites, would be a sect of Baptists, but Baptist as a denomination. So these two primary groups, really three, but two primary groups, can be loosely categorized as schools of thought. And so sometimes you might see that written about Hinduism, about Buddhism. Instead of denomination, they might use school of thought, which as a definition refers to a perception of a group of people who share common characteristics of opinion and outlook. So those are the terminologies that we'll be using. So the rest of this, and this will be the conclusion of the lecture, we'll be discussing the denominations. So the first denomination that I want to talk about is the Dingambara. So the Dingambara comes from the Sanskrit word that means sky clan, and it refers to primarily ascetic Jains, monks, sometimes nuns, but primarily male monks, deeply cherish giving up all possessions and attachments, including their clothing. And so these are the naked ascetics that you would see if you go to modern day India today. They have no clothing, so you see everything in all its glory. The Digambaras claim that their origins, they are the original followers of Mahavira, and that the other denomination, the Setatambraras, are branched off in a later time, around the year 367, with the teachings of Bada Buha. The Digambara sect rejects canonical texts as scriptures. They have no scriptural literature, and everything is passed down through oral traditions. And they believe that the words of Mahavira neither survived nor have been recorded. So they really don't possess a canon, and thus disagree with the other denomination of Jainism, the Setambaras. They do, however, have a semi-quasi canonical literatures that's grouped into literary category known as expositions or Anuyoga. The lifestyle that they have is, and behavior and conduct of a Digambara monk is guided by a code of ethics called the Mukakara, which includes 28 vows that the monk has to do. But not only those, they also subscribe to the 5 main vows of Jainism as well. But some of these additional ones would include never bathing, eat while standing, never using utensils, only using your hands to beg, to sleep only on the hard ground, to only eat once a day, to drink only once a day, that they have to be bald, and instead of shaving their head, they actually pluck their hair out. And it's actually a ritual, and it's also part of the conversion ritual. A lot of Janus monks do. They'll physically pluck out all of their hair. So, hurts. That sounds like it hurts. Including their body hair as well. So if you got hairy arms, hairy legs, hairy nether regions as well, and they are to make confession daily of any sins that they have committed, and they are to always daily meditate on the Tithakaras. The Dingambara female nuns, unlike their male counterparts, wear clothing, and that they must wear clothing. The reasons for this is that the female body is seen as a embodiment of temptation, and so by seeing, a female naked body would arouse a man, thus creating action, thus violating ahimsa. And given the beliefs such as non-attachments and non-possessions, the Digambara tradition has held that women cannot achieve salvation as men can. That the best that a female nun could do is to be reborn in their next life as a male. And so thus Digambara nuns are extremely rare to see. There are some, but they're extremely rare to see because of that traditions. So thus spiritual preferences is given to males. Our next category of denomination is the Setambra. The Setambra comes from the Sanskrit word meaning the white clan and refers to Jains who wear exclusively white materials that are made from hand-spun, homespun fabric that they create from cotton. So as you can see from the image down there, those are an image of women from the Setambra clan, and they created their own clothing. Interesting side note is that Mahatma Gandhi also incorporated some of these principles into his own community, and Gandhi frequently made his own clothing. These monks wear a simple white garment and typically also wear a white mask. And the reason for this white mask, as you can see in the picture, is for them to prevent them from accidentally breathing in and swallowing a bug, thus killing a bug, thus committing violence, thus ahimsa. Again, so you can see how much ahimsa is encompassing everything that a Jain does. They also carry with them, and you can sort of see it, not clear in this picture here, but they also carry with them a broom, a handmade broom. And a lot of times these Jains would, when they're walking, they sweep the broom in front of them consistently to make sure, and they're doing it gently to make sure that they're not going to step on something. So they're clearing their path in order to make sure they don't kill a bug or anything like that, killing a worm, anything like that. That's how, again, ahimsa is an all-encompassing concept within their belief system. The Sev Tamabara trace their practices and dress code to the teachings of the 23rd Tirthakara, that of Parshavanatha, who is believed to be a historical figure that lived in the 9th or 8th century BCE, and that believed that only taught 4 of the 5 Jain vows, that he did not believe in celibacy, and so thus and didn't believe in the abandonment of clothing, so why they're clothed. So many Jains who are of this denomination marry, including monks and nuns, and are distinctively identified in India by their simple white garments, as opposed to Hindus and Buddhist monks that are often wearing orange-colored clothing. So this is where you can see the difference between the two. In contrast, according to Sevtambara traditions, the Digambras arose later, some 600 years later after the death of Mahabira, and that they believe that they were founded by another monk, a firebrand monk known as Situfpu, who is accused of starting the Digambra traditions and rejecting the sacred text of the Siddhabhara traditions and misunderstanding Jain ideology, including belief systems about the nuns and clothing. Both Jain traditions and religious scholars do not know which sect was the original sect, but most side with the Siddhabhara claims. Unlike the Digambra, women nuns are accepted and have legitimate access to moksha as men through their ascetic practices. And so therefore they don't have to reincarnate as men. And in fact, according to some estimates within the Sintambara history, that there have been in history more women associated within this denomination than men. And this Siddhabhara even claimed that the 19th Tirthankara oh, I forget their name. Oh, the name is Mali Natha. Mali Natha was actually a female instead of a male, according to Dingambara traditions. And so that's something that's very interesting and something of difference. The last group that I want to mention is something that typically doesn't get mentioned in the textbooks about Jan traditions, and that are the householder. I consider them a denomination, and the householder are known as Sarvaka. Now, not all Jans are able to fully commit themselves to becoming monks, ascetic monks and nuns. The majority, the vast majority of Jans are classified as the laity. However, within Jainism, these people are referred to as householders. That term, Sarvaka. The laity within Jainism operates in a very similar fashion as we will see with the laity within Buddhism. On the whole, the laity are there to financially support the ascetic community and physically support them by giving them food, giving them shelter, helping them to strive towards achieving moksha. And they have a symbiotic relationship. By the laity giving food and water and shelter during the rainy seasons to the monks and to the nuns, the laity incur good actions in a sense, but it's merit. That's the word that they would use, merit. Buddhism has a similar connotation as well, known as dana. And for the ascetics, the laity is to beg the monk to allow them to help them by begging them, can I give you food? Can I give you water? Can I give you shelter? Can I give you care? The ascetic monk is honoring them by accepting this food. And so you can see this symbiotic relationship that develops. Many of the Jan laity have occupations. Many of them are merchants, and they have occupation or they work within fields that produce no harm, no violence. So many Jans that you'll see in Hindu societies today are bankers. Which you could kind of argue, well, do bankers really harm people? Technically they do if they're evicting somebody of their house, but traditionally it's a job that doesn't require physical action. So bankers, jewelers, they're making crafts, they're working with metals, metal workers, teachers, educators. A lot of the educators in India are actually Jans. And statistically within Indian society, Jans are some of the wealthiest and most educated castes within the Indian society. And unlike Buddhism, Jans do participate within the caste system. They don't reject it outright. The laity do observe a modified vow system and lifestyle. They do practice ahimsa as much as physically possible, but mainly violence, doing no harm. They do not lie. They do not participate in falsehoods. They don't maintain a lot of possessions. They limit their excess of possessions and give heavily to charity as a way to break even at the end of the year. They do take wives. They have sex, but only for the purpose of procreation. But also the laity here take an additional vows that are known as the Ganavartas. And so there are three Ganavartas. One is the limit, it says to limit unnecessary travel and to restrict travel to very small areas. So that's why in India that their Jans are pretty isolated to a certain area, predominantly the western half of India. Number two is to have limited resources in what they're using, to measure things out, to not produce waste, that they make only enough bread to feed their family at a given meal, that they measure everything else like bread to make flour, that they only measure out enough bread to make for the husband, the wife, and the two children. That's it. So 4 pieces of bread. That's it. They don't believe in having any other waste as possible. And then number three is the avoidance of what they considered pointless sins. Things like participating in gossip, making sure you're dealing fairly with people, you're not cheating them out of a business. And pornography is another example of these things. So, this is a quick summary of what Jains believe. Their evolution as a religion has evolved with Hindu society. Uh, like I said, for much of Hindu society, Jains were considered just another denomination of Hinduism. It's not until the British period and the British colonialization of India do Jains become clearly defined as something separate from Hinduism.